Okay, so we've got M27 centered where we need it to be. We've got the mount aligned and synchronized, and everything is relatively good from a focus point of view, but we've got this problem of these trailing stars now, and if we want to do any sort of decent and serious exposures, we're going to have to do some sort of guiding. So I use Starlight Xpress's adaptive optics, the large format version, and I've found these to be probably the biggest step and leap forward in my imaging experience, because it's just got me out of so many problems. It helps with wind, it helps with vibrations, it helps with the mount periodic error. There's just so many things that it overcomes, and more importantly, because it's working off a tip tilt system on its mirror or its glass, there's no inertia involved from the mount as in normal guiding, so the corrections are, I think it's every 5 milliseconds. You know, it's a ridiculously fast response time, so as soon as it sees a movement it can adjust to it, and there's no sort of delay from anything, so you do get really good results. Before, my RMS used to be around about the 0.5, 0.7 pixels when guiding, and that was still pretty tough really to do anything on a seriously long exposure. So what we'll do now is we'll reduce this image a little bit in size just to get things back in perspective, and we will take a longer exposure. So what I do is I have a small script set up here, and what this does is in between images, obviously if the Starlight Xpress adaptive optics has been guiding, it may be that it's guided more in one direction than another. So eventually it will run out of tip tilt axis. So this small script here basically recenters the AO back to the central position and then starts the Astroart guider program. And hopefully when we run this, what will happen is it will pick up a star and then automatically center on it. I can see from that it's not perfectly focused, but we don't need to be super accurate with our focusing, because Astroart uses sub-pixel guiding algorithms, and they're just fantastic. They really are. Look at this. So this is me now guiding automatically using AO and using Astroart on a star, and our RMS at the moment in declination is 0.11 and our right ascension is 0.22. So, you know, I've never seen this sort of guiding on anything I've ever had in the past. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to set this up for a 20-minute exposure, and then I'll come back at the end of the 20 minutes and you can see where it's at. So we're still at early stages of this 20-minute exposure, which is 1200 seconds here. And some of the features in the sequencing that Astroart does is it shows you here how far you are through the current cycle of images. So this is image 21 of 25, so that's what that's relating to. And the actual image in question at the moment, we are 7% of the way through this 1200 second exposure. We tick this box here for auto save, and then in this window what we do is we just give it a file name. So what I tend to do with my file formation convention is that I'll use the filter name at the start, followed by the binning, followed by the object, and then I put this figure in here, which is quite a useful figure for later on. It's actually the focus position of the autofocuser. And why I find that useful is that later on when I'm making flats for these images, if you've took them over a number of nights or weeks or whatever, it's always useful to know what the focus position was when you took the light images, and then that way you can set the focus on the telescope back to that position to take a more accurate flat. I mean, ideally I try and take my flats the same night or the next day. It's not always possible, but that figure comes in really handy for just that purpose. Okay, so I'm going to pause the video again and then come back to hopefully somewhere near the end of the exposure. Just very quickly, on the bottom of the screen here, Astroart shows you the current temperature of the cooler. So the cooler is on this camera and it's set to -25 degrees C. So that's what that is. I'll just quickly run through some of these other tabs as well in case there's anything useful in there. The setup, well obviously we did that before with the telescope setup, scripts, options. I don't usually have a reason to sort of go into that, but that's just a few things that you can set up inside there which then relate back to the fits file later on. Images, again, that's just the orientation of your images and your sizes and how you want them to look when they're being previewed. I don't use this feature, but it could be quite handy if you wanted to make, you know, some sounds happen, you know, when a telescope arrives at the end of a go-to, or if a guide star is being lost or something like that. This time feature here, I don't have reason to use that ever, to be honest with you, but I'm sure it must be useful for something. Maybe it's some sort of a time synchronization with a global clock of some description. The settings tab here, this is for obviously setting up the binning in the camera, whether you want a pause or a delay in between exposures. This is a good feature actually, because if you're using things like dithering, then in between images the camera is going to use the adaptive optics to slightly move the image left or right so that it's placed onto the chip slightly differently as well. And so while that movement is taking place, that would obviously throw out the likes of the guidance system. So it's actually good to have a 3 or a 4 second delay pause in between images while the dithering sorts itself out and then stabilizes again. At that point you can then start the next image, and then you get a nice steady image with a nice round stars again. Obviously if you didn't have that delay, then you'd be moving straight onto the next image while it was also moving the star across the chip through the dithering process. So that pause is quite a handy feature. Full image is just, you know, you're taking full images at a time. If you just wanted to select a certain part of an image, you know, maybe you didn't want the full image, then you can just literally click and grab, you know, whatever region of the images you want, and then you would select from selection here, and then your images after that would be just of that part of the CCD and nothing else. Quickens download times up, and it can be useful if you're doing things, you know, if you're just doing, I mean, I don't use it, but I'm sure it would be, I've messed around with it on things like, you know, planets and stuff like that, but I haven't had a whole load of reasons to use it, to be honest with you. The focus guide tab, well obviously that's just for focusing on either the guide camera or the main camera. This is always the number of seconds exposure in between guides. So at the moment the guide window is following this star and it's taken an exposure every 0.3 seconds. So basically we're getting 3.333 images a second. And that's how fast it's making its adjustments. That's how many adjustments it's making a second. In this calibration window here in Astroart, we get the choice of how we want to move our guiding with regards to right ascension and declination. These are the figures that I've arrived at. If you don't know what figures to use, you can use this calibrate button, and then Astroart will actually move the star around the screen back and forward, left and right, and it runs through a nice process where it arrives at the best figures for where you are on that particular setup in that particular part of the sky as well. So that's really useful. Again, these are other things that you can use, you know, these are really useful. I have dual axis guidance so that it guides in right ascension and declination at the same time, and I find that works really well. And this statistics tab is also really good because it shows you, you know, what's being plotted, the RMS of both axes, as well as a pictorial view really of, you know, of how central you've managed to keep the star. So I'm going to pause again now and then come back when the exposure is finished.